They sat in the car and looked out at the rain-filled darkness. There was no light anywhere except when lightning glittered on the rain. In such illuminations they made out the farmhouse, dripping floods of water from its eaves. There was a chicken house. There were fences. They could not see to the gate or the highway through the falling water, but there had been solid woodland where they turned off into the lane. "We'll wait," said Lockley distastefully, "to see if we are in a tight spot in the morning. If we're well away, and I've no real idea where we are, we'll go on. If not, we'll hide till dark and hope for stars to steer by when we go." Jill said confidently, "We'll make it. But where to?" "To any place away from Boulder Lake Park, and where I'm a human being instead of a crackpot civilian. To where I can explain some things to people who'll listen, if it isn't too late." "It's not," said Jill with as much assurance as before. There was a pause. The rain poured down. Lightning flashed. Thunder roared. "I didn't know," said Jill tentatively, "that you believed the invaders, the monsters, had people helping them." "The overall picture isn't a human one," he told her. "But there's a design that shows somebody knows us. For instance, nobody's been killed, at least not publicly. That was arranged by somebody who understood that if there was a massacre, we'd fight to the end of our lives and teach our children to fight after us." She thought it over. "You'd be that way," she said presently, "but not everybody. Some people will do anything to stay alive, but you wouldn't." The rain made drumming sounds on the barn roof. Lockley said, "But what's happened isn't altogether what humans would devise. Humans who planned a conquest would know they couldn't make us surrender to them. If this was a sort of Pearl Harbor attack by human enemies, and you can guess who it might be, they might as well start killing us on the largest possible scale at the beginning. If monsters with no information about us landed, they might perpetrate some massacres with the entirely foolish idea of cowing us. But there haven't been any massacres. So it's neither a Cold War trick nor an unadvised landing of monsters. There's another angle in it somewhere. Monster-human cooperation is only a guess. I'm not satisfied, but it's the best answer so far." Jill was silent for a long time. Then she said irrelevantly, "You must have been a good friend of Vale?" Lockley said. "No, I knew him, but that's all. He only joined the survey a few months ago. I don't suppose I've talked to him a dozen times, and 4 of those times he was with you. Why'd you think we were close friends?" "What you've done for me," she said in the darkness. He waited for a lightning flash to show him her expression. She was looking at him. "I didn't do it for Vale," said Lockley. "Then why?" "I'd have done it for anyone," said Lockley ungraciously. In a way, it was true, of course. But he wouldn't have gone up to the construction camp to make sure that anyone hadn't been left behind. The idea wouldn't have occurred to him. "I don't think that's true," said Jill. He did not answer. If Vale was alive, Jill was engaged to him, although if matters worked out, Lockley would not be such a fool as to play the gentleman and let her marry Vale by default. On the other hand, if Vale was dead, he wouldn't be the kind of fool who'd try to win her for himself before she'd faced and recovered from Vale's death. A girl could forgive herself for breaking her engagement to a living man, but not for disloyalty to a dead one. "I think," said Lockley deliberately, "that we should change the subject. I will talk about why I went to the lake after you when everything has settled down. I had reasons. I still have them. I will express them, eventually, whether Vale likes it or not, but not now." There was a long silence, while rain fell with heavy drumming noises and the world was only a deep curtain of lightning-lighted droplets of falling water. "Thanks," said Jill very quietly. "I'm glad." And then they sat in silence while the long hours went by. Eventually they dozed. Lockley was awakened by the ending of the rain. It was then just the beginning of gray dawn. The sky was still filled with clouds. The ground was soaked. There were puddles here and there in the barnyard, and water dripped from the barn's eaves, and from the now vaguely visible house, and from the 2 or 3 trees beside it. Lockley opened the door and got out quietly. Jill did not waken. He visited the chicken house, and horrendous squawkings came out of it. He found eggs. He went to the house, stepping gingerly from grass patch to grass patch, avoiding the puddles between them. He found bread, jars of preserves, and cans of food. He inspected the lane. The car's tracks had been washed out. He nodded to himself. He went back to the barn. There was still only dusky half-light. He pulled the doors almost shut behind him, leaving only a 4-inch gap to see through. Now the car was safely out of sight, and there was no sign that any living being was near. "You closed the doors," said Jill. "Why?" He said, reluctantly, "I'm afraid we're as badly off as we were in the beginning. Unless I'm mistaken, we got turned around in that rainstorm on those twisty roads, and the park begins nearby. This isn't the highway I drove up on to find you, the one where my car's wrecked. This is another one. I don't think we're more than 20 miles from the lake here, and that's something I didn't intend." He began to unload his pockets. "I got something for us to eat. We just have to lie low until night and fumble our way out toward the cordon, with the stars to guide us." There was silence, save for the lessened dripping of water. Lockley was filled with a sort of baffled impatience with himself. He felt that he'd acted like an idiot in trying to escape the evacuated area by car. But there'd been nothing else to do. Before that, he'd stupidly been unsuspicious when the wildlife truck came down a highway that he'd known was blocked by a terror beam. And perhaps he'd been a fool to refuse to discuss why he'd gone up to the construction camp to see to her safety when by all the rules of reason it was none of his business. The gray light paled a little. Through the gap between the barn doors he could see past the house. Then he could see the length of the lane and the trees on the far side of the highway. He was laying out the food when suddenly he froze, listening. The stillness of just before dawn was broken by the distant rumble of an internal combustion engine. It was a familiar kind of rumbling. It drew nearer. Except for the singularly distinct impacts of drippings from leaves and roof to the ground below, it was the only sound in all the world. It became louder. Jill clenched her hands unconsciously. "I don't think there are any car tracks at the turnoff where we came in," said Lockley in a level voice. "The rain should have washed them out. It's not likely they're looking for us here anyhow. I've only got 3 bullets left in the pistol. Maybe you'd better go off and hide in the cornfield. Then if things go wrong, they'll believe I left you somewhere." "No," said Jill composedly. "I'd leave tracks in the plowed ground. They'd find me." Lockley ground his teeth. He got out the pistol he'd taken from the truck driver in the lighted room in Serena. He looked at it grimly. It would be useless, but... Jill came and stood beside him, watching his face. The rumbling of the truck was still nearer and louder. It diminished for a moment where a curve in the road took the vehicle behind some trees that deadened its voice. But then the sound increased suddenly. It was very loud and frighteningly near. Lockley watched through the gap between the barn doors. He stayed well back lest his face be seen. The trailer truck with the wildlife control markings on it rumbled past. It growled and roared. The noise seemed thunderous. Its wheels splashed as they went through a puddle close by the gate. It went away into the distance. Jill took a deep breath of relief. Lockley made a warning gesture. He listened. The noise went on steadily for what he guessed to be a mile or more. Then they heard it stop. Only by straining his ears could Lockley pick up the sound of an idling motor. Maybe that was imagination. Certainly, at any other less silent time he could not possibly have heard it. Jill whispered.